Hello and a very warm welcome from Think Change Forum. Think Change Forum is an independent think tank dedicated to generating new ideas, finding answers, and solutions for navigating the changed world we find ourselves in. TCF has illustrious thinkers as its advisors. TCF has been organizing a dialogue series in the run-up to the Union Budget 2023, and which is why we are meeting today for this roundtable. And the topic for today's roundtable is about primarily about taxation issues of the online skill-based gaming sector, which is a sunrise tech-based sector, and has been flagged by the government and everyone else at the future as one of the primary future engines of growth for the Indian economy. Learnings from the roundtable would be submitted as budget recommendations for the government's consideration as the finance ministry prepares to dot the i's and cross the t's in presenting the budget for 2023, which incidentally is the last full budget of the current government's current tenure. Before elections are held in 2024. In 2024, the budget will probably be presented in July, and there will only be an interim budget or a vote on account, as it is called. Now, Budget 2023 is particularly relevant against a backdrop of lack of clarity around applications of sections 194B and 115BB of the Income Tax Act 1961, so far as the online skill-based gaming sector is concerned. Now, there are many issues that require closer examination, closer evaluation, and more clarity and simplification too. Now, say for instance, a key question is whether players of online skill games be allowed a set of entry fees from the win, or should they also be allowed to offset losses in line with the laws applicable to gains that people make by investing in stock market. Issues such as, there's also the prospect of lowering the TDS limit from 10,000 to rupees 1,000 and the impact it could have on the industry, and particularly it could also impact millions of people who engage in such games. So all of these require a closer evaluation and scrutiny. To talk about all of this, we have a stellar panel today, all of whom have been tracking this and know the ins and outs of the industry, as well as the nuances of tax rules and legal implications. We have Mr. Rohan Shah, Senior Counsel, Supreme Court. We have Mr. Swapan Sarkar, Founder, Sarkar and Associates. We have Mr. Suraj Malik, Managing Partner, Legacy Growth Partners, I beg your pardon. Mr. Ramakrishnan, Thiruvananthapuram, he's a public policy analyst, is joining us from Bangalore. And Mr. Trivikraman Thampy, online games entrepreneur, founder, CEO, Games 24/7, who joins us from Goa. Rohan Shah, first to you. There are lots of regulatory gaps and ambiguities, and I'll come to the specifics of all of this later during the course of our roundtable. But first, just to set the context, what do you think are the major regulatory gaps so far as taxation is concerned, and why these need to be done? Because we are meeting at a time when a government-appointed task force, the Audiovisual Gaming and Comics Task Force, has actually submitted its report and is very bullish about the prospects of this sector. And it's quite clear that the government wants to turn India into a global gaming and innovation hub. Given this context, and given the stage that we are in currently in India, don't you think it's about time that we actually turn taxation, the taxation structure for so far as online skill-based game is concerned, into a more simple, rule-based, absolutely clarified, with very few opportunities for misinterpretation in place first? Rohan.
Yeah, I think that wish list is actually common of everything that we do commercially in India. That can we have something simple, understandable, administrable, and supportive. The challenge here, I think, is this: that we have a opportunity which is obviously a humongous opportunity, which is a very new age opportunity. And to deal with that, we're really talking of provisions of taxation, the earliest of which go back to 1961. So right. We're really talking, laws and provisions of 61, 1972, 1986, dealing with a opportunity of 2022 and 2023. And very clearly, they're not going to easily dovetail into each other. So if we see the approach and the traditional approach from a direct tax perspective, it is that, you first identify what is taxable. And under 115BB, you effectively are saying that anything which accrues from these activities of gambling, betting, horse racing, crosswords, and any other form of such income will be taxed at a full tax rate, which is, if you count it with the basic tax rate and the cess, is about 31.2%. The other issue sort of typically in taxation would come up would be the TDS when you effectively pay this out. And that under 194B, really you deduct the entirety of the TDS upfront, which again is a provision very specific to these type of activities. And the third provision in the scheme, which is specific to these type of activities, is section 58.4, in terms of which you are not allowed a deduction of either expenses or allowances. And there is therefore no contemplation of a set-off. So these are, from a policy perspective, special incomes. They are special incomes taxed at what is otherwise the highest tier. There is no contemplation of expense or loss because it isn't seen as a stream of business or profession. And what you therefore have is a structure which sort of crystallized, I would think, around the 1970s, dealing with this issue when neither crosswords was expected to be a mega industry, nor were horse races expected to be a mega industry. What you have today is, of course, as you said in the earlier part of your narration, the ability to create a globally leading industry with probably the largest or second largest number of captive users in the country. And the ability then for what it does in terms of employment and what it does in relation to allied industries and opportunities there. Now, might be worthwhile sort of just trying to look at some analogous positions as to how this is treated. And the first of those is, if you look internationally, in the US, you treat this as a normal stream of income, which really means that expenses are set off, losses are set off. There is not a special dispensation in relation to how you will deal with this. In the UK, and obviously they have a certain objective in terms of both socially and economically of how they want to deal with it. Your winnings are not going to be subjected to income tax. You will pay GST upon the transaction of laying your bet or investing what you do. So at one end, you have no income tax at all, which is UK. You have US, which is a more normalized basis. You can claim your deductions. And if you took an analogy in the context of Indian activity, I guess the day trader in the stock market could be one analogy. In the context of somebody who's recurrently participating, has a chance based on his skill or her skill to win or not win. And again, because the instrument they deal with is an investment instrument, the situation is that they are able to book all nature of offsets, losses, expenses, etc. Even though it's a daily engagement, it's not at a very large level. It certainly is not with an investment intention. So, I think that's one analogy that you have where you at least allow all the expenses, even in. And then I think, you have the other emerging sector, which is really the whole crypto and, where we are going to go with that, how we regard that. So I think direct tax, this is the issue. I think on the indirect tax, we all understand that there is one issue, I think, which will impact direct tax policy, and which is this distinction between games of skill and games of chance. If on the direct tax side, we have no such distinction. And therefore, we are saying that, if people make a profit or an income, how are we going to deal with it? It has no characterization based on skill or chance. On the direct tax side, while we have that indirect tax side, that is a critical indicator. Now, to me, we've spent a lot of time and litigation and newsprint on this issue. But one defining factor could be, does the skill of a person give them a greater chance of success? If the skill of a person determines the potential for success, then I think, we could really collapse all those controversies into a much, much narrower field, which would help, I think, both on the direct and indirect tax side. But the factor that people who play under the current system ultimately will end up sometimes paying greater tax than what their potential earnings are,
Absolutely.
I think is a dampener, as is the factor that I don't think legally and socially we have all learned to draw the line between when it is gambling and when it is just skill, chance, or maybe the reality is it is just amusement. For some people, like to listen to music or download a movie. For some people, they would like to spend their time, and their options playing a game. So I think in that background, let me hand that back to you. But I think this is the background in which we go into the budget, and we have enough analogy around us to draw from.
Thanks, Rohan. And thanks for setting the context and also flagging the specifics of the Income Tax Act as well as some of the indirect tax issues. Trivikraman, if I may come to you, as per Section 194B, read with Section 115BB of the Income Tax Act, and I'm quoting from the Act, the person responsible for paying any person any income by way of winnings from any lottery, crossword puzzle, or card game, or any other game of that sort, in an amount exceeding 10,000 rupees, shall deduct, at the time of payment, of course, shall deduct 30% as income tax. Now, this is where the problem here, is, if I may use that word, is of language or phraseology. The language of Section 194B is markedly different from other provisions relating to tax deduction at source, or TDS as it is commonly called, which this lack of clarity on the phraseology or the ambiguity that exists here is kind of potentially raises various contentious issues around its applicability and scope. Now I'll come to one of these, and since you have been running, you are the founder of Games 24/7, and you have been an online gaming entrepreneur, have been tracking this sector for years now. You can probably throw more light on this. One of the issues that arises is where TDS under Section 194B should be effected, whether it should be effected on the gross receipts or net receipts. Take, for example, I'll give an example. Suppose I bet rupees 1,000 while playing poker, and I end up winning rupees 11,000. Now, question arises as to whether TDS obligation under Section 194B will become applicable on rupees 11,000, which is gross receipts, or rupees 1,000, which is net receipts. Now, one may argue that since the term income by way of winnings is not defined in the Income Tax Act, an interpretation may be taken that it means gross amount of receipts of a player. How do you see getting around this? Because this is something that is going to create a lot of problems insofar as interpretation is concerned. Trivikraman, can you unmute yourself, please? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Gaurav. So, as far as the law is concerned, I'm going to defer more to the lawyers on the call here, but I'll share my 2 cents on that. I think there is definitely not 100% clarity in the industry on what that means, whether that's, whether the TDS has to be deductible on gross or net. I can share with you that as Games 24/7, we've been following deducting tax on the gross from the very inception of the business, and we have been paying, collecting that TDS and paying it to the government since our business started for any gross winnings over 10,000. But you're absolutely right that there is no 100% lack of clarity, and at the end of the day, that clarity also matters as far as the law is concerned to the players, because as you're aware, I think there's been a lot of talk in the media and also some questions raised in Parliament about evasion of taxes when it comes to online gaming. And I think the numbers that have been thrown around are in the tens of thousands of crores. And I think what I can contribute to this discussion is that I think a lot of those big numbers are based on, I would say, a lack of understanding of the core business model that online gaming has today. And the context, and I think Mr. Shah referred to that quite a bit, that these laws were written in, maybe 5 decades ago, keeping very different things in mind. So if you're playing a lottery, for instance, the gains in lottery, anytime you win, are substantial. You're winning, 1,000 times or 10,000 times, or a lot more than what you put into the contest.
Right.
If you were playing crosswords back in the 70s, you weren't playing crosswords every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In the online gaming world, one, the frequency of play is very, very high. I think the day trading example is a very appropriate one that Mr. Shah gave. And second, the gains in any one single game are not massive, because usually you're playing with a few players. You're not playing a lottery kind of contest with tens of thousands or lakhs of players. So the gain that any one player makes is very, very little. In fact, if you look at our business and the models that we have run, if a player, let's imagine that let's forget TDS for a moment, because TDS is just a responsibility for the operator to collect taxes. At the end of the day, the player himself is liable for those taxes. Right. It's just that they're collecting the tax on the player's behalf. But if the player was in online gaming, if players were required to pay 30% tax on their gross winnings, in our business, even a player who's winning as many as 70% of the games that they play, the player would have to go out of pocket to pay those taxes. Their winnings wouldn't be sufficient to cover those taxes. They would have to pay over and above what they won.
Right.
I mean, you can imagine if that was to happen in the stock market, right, like what would happen to the stock market if there was no offset of losses or entry fees that was allowed, or the amount that you had invested in a stock. So I think there is, first of all, there is no tens of thousands of crores of evasions of taxes. Players are not, it's not that, thousands or tens of thousands of players are making a ton of income based on this that they're not paying taxes on. And second of all, if that was to be done, if the law that was written keeping in mind lotteries and crosswords and things like that was to be implemented on online gaming, I think the implications are pretty disastrous. I think the kind of growth that we're talking about in the gaming sector, like, not only that comes to a grinding halt, I think the industry more or less comes to an end if those kind of taxes are to be paid by players, because they're not going to play. You're not going to want to invest in the stock market if you had to pay taxes without setting off capital losses, or the amount that you invested in a stock. And the worst problem that we have today is that, unlike the stock market, where if the stock market laws are not, or tax laws are not great for you, you can't easily go and invest in international stock markets. With gaming, that's really very easy. One of the challenges that India is facing right now, it's actually been a global challenge, that international gaming operators, the geographic boundaries are very porous. There's a large number of international gambling operators. These are not skill gaming operators. These are gambling operators that are operating within India, that are actually, unofficial estimates are that the industry is significantly larger than the local legitimate skill gaming industry. And so these are the kind of taxes that local legitimate operators, skill gaming operators had to pay. The implications are obvious. All these players are going to go and play with the illegitimate offshore operators where there are no taxes due. In fact, recently there was a news report that the government has sent notices to, or emails to, foreign operators asking questions about, this was a media report recently about taxation, but the fact of the matter is they have no jurisdiction on levying taxes on international operators. So it's a very complicated problem, and I think the most important thing is to arrive at a solution carefully. That just yesterday the government has announced that MeitY is going to be the nodal ministry for regulating online games.
Right.
And I think whatever we do, whether it's regulation, consumer protection, GST, direct taxes, I think it all needs to be thought through together and in a very constructive manner, and not in a piecemeal way.
Absolutely. No, very true. In fact, a siloed approach is not going to help anyone's cause because of the very interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary aspects that are involved in it. There is a question of technology, there's a question of regulation, there's a question of offshore, and also the whole question of turning India into global innovation. Unless your tax laws are very friendly, in the sense, or rather, if I say so, if the tax laws are hostile, it's only going to chase away both of the industry as well as the players. On that note, Suraj, if I may come to you, raised the point of about section 194B and 115BB on gross receipts and net receipts. Now, first of all, I would like to know your views about what is the correct interpretation for that, because there's a lot of ambiguity going around in the market, and also in terms of various cases that we've seen. The other issue is, at what time should the TDS be effected, or as it is said, the scope of term, quote unquote, payment. Now, if the TDS liability threshold of rupees 10,000 is said to be triggered at the time of payment thereof, as is defined by the income tax law, section 194B, that is rife with all kinds of possible interpretation. The foremost being, of course, whether the threshold is subject to an annual determination of all winnings, or whether the ceiling is with reference to winning at the conclusion of a specific round of competition. These are extremely these are aspects that need where a lot of ambiguity exists and needs a lot of clarity. What's your view on this?
Sure, thanks, Gaurav. So, I'm of a belief that, any ambiguity in law is also a game of chance. It's more game of skill, right? Someone is left there, planted it. Because look at it, right? The industry, when these sections were there, right? And there's so much attention to something like in horse races. And I'm just talking about that because there have been exceptions carved out there. And we all know, right, who ran horse races and everything around that. And there is a carve out for horse races to say you can get set off of cost, you can get set off of losses, etc. So when an industry within that, chance income of people solving crossword on Times of India, etc., or, paying random gains on television, the government did take note, and they've, when they made laws, they said that let the industry figure its own out, people will structure their way. And let's leave something out there. So I'm of a belief that it's not that someone has made 194BB different from everything else, even if it was a cut, copy, paste of the language. The section on paying commission to a lottery agent and versus, what you do from a payer, the language is different. So it's hard, again, in our country, everything is fairly litigious, especially when it comes to taxes and, for some of these sectors which become very, very visible. But my personal view is that you have to read income tax as, what the lawmaker put it in. And if 194BB language is different from everything else in the TDS provision, you have to sort of give it enough attention that why is it different? And one of the key things they've taken away is that crediting to an account, right? So someone playing games 7, for example, as long as he's paying, as long as it's accruing, but it's not he's not taking money off the table or taking his chips off the table. The section is designed to say that, hey, till then there is no tax because you are your money is still, invested in some sense, and you don't have access to it. You are not being paid. The platform or the agent or anyone who's running that game has not really given it to you. It's like, in KBC, you are going step by step through various things, right? It's not that when you reach 1 lakh, you start TDS on 1 lakh. You could lose it all. And I think that was the intention for taking away the credit angle on TDS from 194B. They said that let that credit come when someone has an ability to withdraw and ability to take that payment out. And that's where an operator should see that if the payment is more than 10,000 bucks, deduct a tax. Again, by choice, or I think by skill, they have not put a financial year threshold. And again, I would read a law as the way it is, that if there is no financial year threshold, there is a possible view that you could take that you have to test 10,000 every time someone is taking payment out. And this might sound aggressive because on the face of it, it looks like we are defeating the provisions of law. But it is what the law is as it stands today, that it says that anytime you're paying someone more than 10,000 bucks, you deduct tax at whatever the applicable rate is, which is 30% by another section. So I think the law is, from an operator standpoint, made their life a little easier. But for the receiver, for a player, and Mr. Thampy also mentioned that the player has to figure out his own tax. The player will not, because of other provisions in 58 and, the way 115B is, that's where the problem lies for the player, that I can't, even if the operator is giving me a set off of entry fee or, allowing me to set off, like if 70% of the games I win, 30% I lose. Most operators allow me to offset those losses while deducting TDS. But when I have to pay my own taxes, I think 58 is the spoiler there, which says that, on this income, you can't offset just anything, no expenditure, no allowance. And I think that needs to, the only change perhaps the budget needs to bring there is bring some reasonableness of, cost in terms of entry fee, bring some reasonableness of, as Mr. Shah mentioned, someone whose skill is helping him get better, allow expenditure for, some of those things, so that you have this industry becomes more professional and is, clearly distinguished from how we understand gambling. So Gaurav, that's my thought that, whichever way the industry has prospered in spite of the law, and people will find a way to structure it. Some people will be conservative, some people will be aggressive. But if the law gives certainty, it will just, allow people to, grow with confidence.
Right. No, thanks. Suraj, you said that the industry has prospered despite the law. I think it's about time to make the industry prosper because of the law too, which is going to make it even more prosperous. On that note, Swapan, Sarkar, if I may, Suraj is of the view that the law was made in a certain, you have to understand why the law was written in a certain way, because the language of TDS is very different in 194B is very different from the rest of the Income Tax Act. Now, what this is also could potentially lead to, and Mr. Thampy actually alluded to it in an oblique manner, is that it can actually chase away both gamers as well as the industry, people who participate in these games as well as the industry outside of India's jurisdiction, because the tax laws are seen to be hostile. Eventually, it is going to, it's going to be bad for both the industry as well as the government. So the government ends up losing potential revenues, because if the industry and also the players, the participants, move outside of India and go to offshore locations, because here we are living in a kind of a flat world. This is all technology driven. You don't need a physical newspaper to solve the crossword puzzle, which was the case in the 1970s and 80s any longer. Where does this lead to? So, it's anyone's case that you need a very, very simple tax regime. What is probably preventing the government, if all of us can see it, for instance, what is preventing the government, in your view, from coming out with a very simple, easy to interpret tax law for the online skill-based gaming and other related industries?
Well, when you have the silo of special income, it will always create confusion and chaos. It always does. Now, I think when you formulate a provision in law, the tax laws, you will have to look at the fundamental principles of the act before you enact any provision. To give you a very simple example, I mean, the phrase income tax means a tax on income. Now, income actually relates to profits and gains. And that in turn means that the taxability will have to be on the income embedded in that transaction. It cannot be beyond that. So this is what the courts have also held all through, that the embedded income is what is subject to tax. So that's one area which I think needs looking into by the authorities. The second part is, as far as the TDS part is concerned, which is 194B, in fact, the TDS provisions by itself are facing a lot of challenges. Now, if the TDS deducted is a lower amount than what is prescribed in that particular provision, you can still get away if the recipient is paying the taxes. So this is what the courts have held, that if the recipient pays the taxes, the due taxes on that particular income, so then the TDS, if it is deducted at a lower rate than what is prescribed under that provision, it doesn't really give. The law is protect. The law protects both the giver as well as the recipient. Of course, the giver may be subject to some interest factors, which for not deducting the total tax, but he doesn't have to come up with the entire taxability of the whole thing. Now that's one. And sticking to 194B, it also talks about winnings in kind. Now, when you have winnings in kind, and let's say partly in cash and partly in kind, or the whole thing is in kind, so the tax deductibility again becomes a very big challenge as to how to go about it, because you have the valuation as to how do you value that particular winning, and how would you tax it. Now that's another thing. Now coming to 115BB, it talks about winnings from winnings from lotteries and crossword puzzles. And I for one have never been able to understand how can lotteries and crossword puzzles be on the same plane. It is not possible, because one is definitely a chance, the other is a bit of a skill involved. GST Council, I mean, so I'm sorry, I'm deviating a little, but GST Council has struggled to distinguish between the two, the game of skill and the game of chance. They have set up a high-powered committee, but they haven't been able to come up with an answer to that. And they have said, and they've come up with a very convenient rate of 28% GST on the whole thing. This is where things have to change a little. As I said, that the embedded income is what has to be taxable. You cannot have a taxability on the whole transaction. Because when you say winnings, you're actually looking at the gross receipts. You're not looking at the net. So obviously, financial year in the Income Tax Act is always a threshold for determining your profits or losses, profits and gains or losses for that particular year from that transaction, and that is an allowability which I don't think there should be any two opinions about. So that is something which, and then there are other issues also. When you talk about a game of skill and a game of chance, if you have a self-built intellectual property, now courts have again held that if you have that, and if you earn something against that self-built intellectual property rights that you have developed on your own, then there is no taxability, because you cannot determine what is that cost of that IPR that you have developed. So that is again another area which is important. Now, as far as the deductions are concerned, we do have provisions in the Income Tax Act which can be followed. Let's look at rental income. Now, rental income is what you deduct from there is the property tax that you pay, and beyond that, you have a 30% deduction for repairs and maintenance without producing any vouchers for the actual expenditure which you may have incurred. So there is an ad hoc kind of a deduction which is available in rental income, which starts from section 22 and goes up to 24. So those that applicability, that provision can be applied here also, that you can have an ad hoc allowance which is allowed. See, unless you start off in that manner, it will be very difficult for this industry to achieve any success and go beyond what it is where it stands today. Because if you, I think the government, goes more by that emotional impact that a particular transaction makes. And when you talk about betting, and when you talk about gaming, and when you talk about gambling, these are sinful services, which are sin goods or sin services, which are not looked upon as the best things in the world. So, but that is something which you have to live with. The Americans actually spend more on lotteries than on movies or on sports tickets or theaters. And this is statistics which is provided by the American government. So all these factors combined, that you cannot wish away something. And why I'm trying to say that is that because you can't wish away something which is here to stay. So if it is here to stay, so let's have proper regulations which will help us in taking it forward. And in that context, I would say that the TDS provisions are definitely under challenge, because even if I don't deduct the whole amount, it doesn't really matter. I'm not saying that you should be doing that, but the point here is that you have to if the recipient pays, then you are not subject to any further deductions of that, because one income has to be taxed only once. It cannot be, you cannot have more than one deduction. And then you have that in-kind kind of a situation which is quite prevalent, and that is something which has to be tackled. And well, it's because basically the technology, any internet-based activity which comes into being will always pose challenges. So I think that a very high-powered committee has to look into this, and that should be made up of experts in the technical field and in the financial field and on the taxation field to make the whole thing a little, it has to be pragmatic. So that is my objective, which I think should be followed. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Thank you. And yeah, it's a very interesting piece of insight, because the key word here is that it has to be pragmatic. Mr. Ramakrishnan, the government appointed task force on AVGC, audiovisual gaming and comics, has submitted its report, and it has now estimated that India's AVGC sector has an overall market size of 2.3 billion in 2019, which is 3 years earlier. Obviously, it would have grown at a significantly high. At a high rate over the last 3 years. Now, according to the task force, the sector is expected to grow at 2.2 times over the next 4 years, which is going to be, and even if it grows at about 2.2, it's still going to be about only 1.5% of the global AVGC market. So there's a huge amount of potential that exists for the Indian AVGC sector. But that said, now if India has to turn into a global, gaming and innovation hub, the policy environment has to be extremely friendly, and actually it has to be less hostile and easy to interpret and without any ambiguities. What we now see is that, as previous speakers have pointed out, there are lots and lots of ambiguities so far as tax policies are concerned. How can India aspire to be a global innovation, gaming innovation hub, if the tax policies are dominated and peppered with all kinds of ambiguities? Mr. Ramakrishnan.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you very much for raising this relevant question. So my understanding of this online gaming, from various public policy perspectives, whether it is legal or financial, then moral, ethical, all this is a very complex issue. And unless otherwise the government comes up with 3 points, actually, it should be, the policy has to be very logical. Mm-hmm. So when I say logical, it should be consistent with similar sectors in other fields, and then it should be consistent. And the third thing is, it must be very pragmatic. Pragmatic in the sense, it must work on the ground. So it cannot be. So although Mr. Rohan Shah has set the contest for this, I also, would like to set the contest, because contest is very, very important in having the clear intent for the government to, move in the right direction. The first point is, if the first thing is about the offshore. So if we are not going to promote, or if we are going to hinder the online gaming industry in India, then it is going to come from outside, and it is going to swindle all our resources from us. And then it becomes more like, we have done it. The policy, the patient, the operation is successful, the patient died. So that kind of condition would emerge. So that is the first thing that the government has to, look at it when it comes to, policies. That includes the taxation also. That is what I say, that the external, the second thing is, if at all, it's also an innovative, field. Gaming is an innovative field. I know so many students who have taken up gaming as a profession. Not playing the games, but even inventing the new games, developing the new games as a profession, and they, enjoy that, and they think that it is a very creative field. So, and moreover, Supreme Court has already cleared that these games, whether it is online rummy or any other online, these games are not a matter of chance, but it is a matter of skill. So it has been already made it very clear. Say, for example, Tamil Nadu government has prohibited race course, that horse race in 1970s. And they have installed a horse statue also in Chennai. By 1980s, late 1980s, if my memory is right, Supreme Court has gave a verdict saying that horse race cannot be prohibited, cannot be banned. And finally, they ended up the judgment with long live horses. That is what they said. So, it's more of, people have looked upon it as, as an emotional issue. Saying that it is affecting the some sections of the people who are into this. So these kind of ambiguity should not be there in the minds of in the mind of the government, because even if you try to ban it at state level, because many state governments have come forward and then enacted a law saying that it should be banned, and then the high courts are staying it, or making it null and void, and then finally it will go to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is also going to say the same thing, because this is what actually as long as it is skillful game, there is no need for banning. The second thing is about the taxation policy that we have been discussing very thoroughly now. So the taxation policy also has to be inconsistent with with that intent of the government. If the intent of the government is going to be allowing this industry to grow, rather than creeping in from foreign soil through nefarious routes, so they must rationalize the taxation. For example, once you say that it is a game of skill, then the game of chance, for example, income from the lottery is taxed at 30%. That is not applicable here.
Absolutely.
So for example, even for that matter, trading in share market, investing in share market, even angel investors, they are also doing, they are also taking reasonable risk, it's also a game of skill. We can't say that it is a game of, gambling. It's a game of chance. So again, these two taxes, one is about offsetting the losses. Offsetting losses should be very much permitted, as much as it is happening in the case of, earnings from the trade, share market, because it's very analogous and very similar. The second point, the second point is regarding the revenue. Say you are on the one hand, you are taxing it at, although we are not discussing about the indirect taxes now, you are taxing it at at 28% as GST, and then you are taxing it at income, putting income tax at 30% or whatever it may be, and then even if you cross the income beyond 10,000 rupees, then immediately you start taxing at the direction, TDS doing it. TDS, these things are not going to, there should be a very clear consistency in the way the entire, rather looking at each and every issue separately, it should be seen a complete flow. How much, where from it starts, how much, innovation it creates, and then how much, it is going to help the economy. And will it be possible for, the government to stop the human mind in involving in such games?
Absolutely.
Then where is the limit? Again, for example, angel investor, anybody cannot become an angel investor. There is a limit actually set by SEBI that you should have at least 2 crore wealth. Then only you can become an angel investor, because it's very risky. So that kind of restrictions can be put by the government. I think that is also fair. But stopping it at the, at the beginning level, so who can play up to what level? Based on their source of income, based on their all that. So that, so the reasonable restrictions are permissible, but banning the games, because it's a populistic demand by the.
That's a very well made point. Banning is not something that should be considered. So Rohan, if I may turn to you, we have seen all the experts here talk about the ambiguities that exist, and clearly there is uniformity on and unanimity on why these need to be, these ambiguities need to be completely taken away, and more clarity is required. But I have a more broader question for you. As Suraj said, that in crosswords is something that it will require a physical newspaper to solve a crossword, but here you're actually playing games online at the click of a mouse on your phone, or click of a button on your phone. Now, technology will always be ahead of regulation. What is happening here is that our regulation and our laws are probably decades behind technology. How do we leapfrog? And even if we cannot keep pace with technology, but how can we leapfrog into a probably very, very close to where technology is? Because the technological obsolescence is so rapid, and the process of creative destruction is so rapid, that is almost impossible to keep pace with and also predict which way technology is going to turn. Crypto obviously is an example, but we'll leave crypto aside for the moment. So far as gaming is concerned, do you think there's a case for completely doing away with a section like, say, 115BB, because that was brought about in 1987, and we are in 2023 now, almost in 2023. Do you think it requires a complete overhaul, or something like a direct taxes code that completely simplifies every section and removes the gobbledygook and makes it easy to interpret, is something that is in order?
Yeah, Gaurav, I think direct taxes code is a slightly larger issue, but
Yeah.
let me sort of look at, the three factors which I think are at play, which are the critical factors. I think the government is acutely cognizant of the potential of this industry. And that's why you have the task force and the committee and, the parent ministry, etc. At the same time, I think whether it's government, policymakers, other, people in the media, I think we are overwhelmed by two factors. One is we don't know where this technology can go and is there a potential for misuse.
Yeah.
And the second is there is an element of morality. So you're bringing together a great opportunity with the fear of the unknown in technology and with an aspect of morality, which are also sort of three competing factors you have. The question to me is, even if these three were the factors, should it overwhelm the fundamentals? And the fundamental is that under the Income Tax Act, you have a certain focus of taxation. And what is that focus of taxation? You are not a turnover tax. There are regimes in the world which tax turnover. You are not a turnover tax, right? Even in the Indian Income Tax Act, shippers are taxed on tonnage. It's a turn. So you look at turnover, you say, I will give you a presumptive basis. Mining companies are looked at in the context of the turnover. But the rest of the world, and that includes this industry, is to be taxed on what is the surplus which emanates from any activity.
Right.
That surplus is what is required to be taxed. And that surplus is what the entire act is geared to tax. So if you are in a profession, what do you earn vis-a-vis what do you spend if you are in a business? So to my mind, this aspect of the fear of where this technology will go, morality, all of that is not a basis for us to collapse.
Right.
Fundamental basis of taxation, which is that you are going to tax what is the accrual beyond the expenditure. Now, let's look at so-called sin industries, right? Alcohol and tobacco. Do you deny them expenses? You don't.
Yeah.
Do you deny them any nature of legitimate expense in business pursuit, whether on the income side or the expenditure side? You don't. So the morality argument we have left behind. We are saying that effectively we are going to tax you on a certain basis. The second issue is potential misuse, right? The potential misuse is really a matter of our accepting that technology will run in different areas, some of which are very desirable, some of which are not. That's the story of the internet. That's the story of medical technology sort of going into morphing. That is the story of many fields of endeavor. That yes, there is a potential for misuse. But because there is a potential for misuse, we do not freeze in the context of saying the fundamentals should change. And from my perspective, the issue here is, obviously, we need an extremely cohesive, sensitive law to the potential of this industry and the fact that technology will always be dynamic. More importantly, user patterns will be dynamic. Right. And there are no geographical boundaries which now effectively rein in the user, because there are no geographical boundaries. So if in a world of no geographical boundary, you want your fair share of tax, then you must have a fair system as compared to all other existing taxing geographies. And that's the only way that you will get your fair share. And you cannot legislate and you cannot formulate from fear, nor can you formulate from morality. Either you ban something, which in our constitutional scheme is exceptional, and I don't think there is any question of any of these activities going there. Now, it is real, it exists, then I think you have to have a world-class, supportive, promotive tax policy, but not in isolation tax policy. I think the entirety of the generic policy has to evolve. We don't need to put our fundamentals under a question mark. And, issues like this TDS, I mean, we are allowing something to linger. There are only two issues. When should I pay? And at what point, at 10,000 or at every episode should I pay? Now, these are two issues. If these two issues have been lingering as long as they have, why could we not have a CBDT clarification to say, here is the issue. Either you want me to pay on every rupee, you want me to pay when I pay more than 10,000, clarify it. You want me to do it annualized, you want me to do it on every event. I think it would have been pretty easy to take this by the scruff of the neck, issue a clarification, put this behind us and move forwards. And quite honestly, I don't think we should entrap this industry in the 72 and 61 provisions of gambling and crossword. In fact, use this to maybe even rewrite those laws, because quite honestly now, the old concept of 1960 of getting a Amrit Bazar Patrika or a Hindu or a Times of India crossword, writing it and getting a 500 rupee check and, mithai baat rahe hain apne mohalle mein, all that is gone. We have to move forward. We are aspiring to be the 5th most economically powerful nation. I think we have to act like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Rohan. Thanks for this very wonderful perspective. Trivikram, final word from you on the pop. There is this risk that if you don't get our tax policies right, as you mentioned in earlier remarks, there is a possibility that everything the industry as well as the players might move away from India to offshore jurisdiction where Indian tax laws don't apply. That will be a travesty not just for the industry, because we'll probably squander away an opportunity to turn into a global gaming innovation hub, but it'll also be a travesty for the government, because the government actually squanders away an opportunity to earn more revenues. So it's time to get pragmatic. It's time to get pragmatic, as Rohan has said. And what do you think specifically that the finance minister should do to at least demonstrate the government's intent to walk the talk on this in the budget?
I mean, to be fair, and I think a few people, on this forum, I think probably everybody has used the word morality at some point, when they've referred to this topic. And I think, consumer protection, that's how I look at it. Consumer protection is important. And I think the government needs to think hard about consumer protection. In fact, we're part of the e-gaming federation, which has submitted fairly detailed proposals to the government on how strong consumer protection can be built in. In my view, the best way forward, keeping in mind, that there are no geographic boundaries when it comes to internet and when it comes to gaming, is that you have sensible and constructive tax policy. So the tax burden is not so terrible that consumers run away to foreign operators, right? And at the same time, you come up with some sort of consumer protection measures, some sort of certification, so that an operator knows. A consumer knows when they're going to play on a certain gaming site. For instance, you could be carrying a seal, which says that this particular operator is certified because they follow certain procedures that have been laid down by the government, certain consumer protection measures, certain prevention of money laundering measures, all kinds of rules can be laid down. This is not rocket science. This has been done by many, many jurisdictions. That there are operators who basically follow these rules. There are operators who pay those level of taxes. And then even the consumer has no reason to go to an offshore operator. That is obviously less trustworthy than a certified Indian local operator that is sitting in India. So, that's, I think, the magic mantra for success all around. Have a constructive level of taxation that increases, and it will increase revenues substantially for the government over the next decade. Have consumer protection in place that addresses the government's core concern, that are consumers protected when they're playing these games or not. Those two things done well together will ensure growth of the industry, whereas, at the same time ensuring consumers are protected, and will keep offshore operators out. And I'm not suggesting something here that hasn't already happened and been tested. It has been done in many, many markets. The US for decades tried to ban online gambling. For decades, it tried to ban it. What was actually happening? There was tens of billions of dollars that was being wagered offshore. Now, with multiple states from New Jersey to Delaware, to Pennsylvania legalizing real money gaming, a lot of those bets are now moving onshore. That's increasing government taxes. That's increasing consumer protection, because all these operators are required to follow strong consumer protection measures that the government has put in place. That's the way forward in a world, as we have all said, without geographic boundaries.
That's right. Very true. Suraj, Malik, as Trivikraman said, it's time to get pragmatic, but it's also time to get a little constructive. And consumer protection is actually the key word here. So how do you think the finance minister can get a little constructive and probably a little creative too, so far as taxation policies for online gaming sector is concerned?
Sure, and I would agree with what Rohan mentioned, right? I don't think there's too much creativity needed here, and incremental change, just to clarify some of these, nuisance elements that there, I think are good enough, and it could come as part of the act. It could come as part of clarification for this industry. But yeah, as I would say that if they just want to make a policy to give, confidence to the players in India, I think this whole unorganized to organized, right? A lot of this lottery, gambling, etc., used to be unorganized, like the, newspaper and the magazine and sending it over, and it was hard to track. But I would feel that just like stock exchange, right? You need a KYC, you need your Aadhaar PAN verification, you have a DMAT, and everything today is in that annual information statement that we get or in our 26 AS. So once someone is signing up with a element of what KYC is, and for, let's say, an organized player who is signing up for consumer protection, who's signing up for indemnity and obligations for loss or for system failures or for anything else, where the scope of misuse is low, I think it's just about qualifying that this sector is governed by traditional taxation provisions, which means income is income less expense, and so be it. So the changes have to be fairly incremental and nothing super creative. I think they need to be more creative on the agriculture or other sides, which are there. But I don't think gaming needs any knee-jerk reaction.
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, what it requires is the government's demonstration of intent here. Swapan, Sarkar, do you think that incrementalism is something? Incrementalism is something that is the order of the day, and we don't really need a complete big bang approach. A gradual incrementalism will probably fix many of the problems here, because it's also going to demonstrate that the government is actually quite intent for the progress of this sector.
Well, that will happen when you have a total understanding of the whole structure as to how it works. Only then you can have incremental earnings. And I would like to say here is that when you talk about 30%, it doesn't stop there, because there's an element of surcharge. So if I am an individual and my earnings are over 5 crores, I have to pay 37%. If I am a company, domestic company, and if I'm over 1 crore profit-wise, I have to pay 7%. And if I'm over 10 crores, I have to pay 12%. So, and these are all before the 4% cess that we have. So all these factors all come into being, and we are not being, and everything is not being put on the table in front of the person who is ultimately going to pay the tax. So these are factors which unless you are transparent, you see, we seem to dwell in a lot of opaqueness all the time. That is where it comes and hits us. We have to be transparent. We have to give examples. Like in the American tax laws, they have examples of how the tax is to be, how they're going to be taxed in a particular transaction. So those kind of situations, unless you bring in, how will you? And today, because of the advanced technologies that we have, it's not too difficult to relate to the taxpayer. So why aren't you doing it? So those things. Just setting up a high-powered committee to decide what is going to happen will never, because as a legal brain, anybody will come up with some loopholes in those systems, which is neither for the benefit of the government or for the taxpayer. Let's have a win-win situation, which is more important. Let's be transparent. Let's say that this is how it is. this is the deduction that you're going to get. We could start with an ad hoc deduction, as I said, like you have in rental income. So you can have that. So why can't we have that kind of a scenario so that people are willing to, people actually know where they stand. Today there's a big question mark as to what is my tax liability. That is something which we need to get away from. And I would always appeal that it's a brain-racking kind of a situation which needs to be worked out with the help of technology, so that we come to a situation where everybody is happy about what is happening.
Yes, absolutely right. Final word, Mr. Ramakrishnan, from you, very briefly. Consistency, as Mr. Swapan Sarkar said, consistency and transparency is something that is required. The taxation laws will take care of itself through incremental fixes, as Rohan Shah has pointed out, and also Suraj has pointed out. But what is required is consistency and the government's demonstration of the intent, and also lack of openness, lack of ambiguity, and lack of transparency. Final word from you on how to grow this sector through friendly policies.
Yeah, Gaurav, thank you. So I don't think the incremental policy can happen only when there is a clear policy framework in the place. Yeah. It cannot be, because when we go for incremental policy, what will happen is there is a very high chance of falling in the trap of inconsistency. So first we should have a very comprehensive policy, taking all factors into consideration, doing it at 360-degree feedback, taking all factors into consideration, and once that is very logical, reasonable, and then consistent, and then practicable or pragmatic, then in that case, small incremental changes in the policy framework in the months to come may be okay. If at all we go for incremental changes now without having a solid framework, because as we have already pointed out, policy comes very late than the technology. So we need to put the policy, framework very clearly, without any ambiguity, and it also must, stand in the scrutiny of law and judicial process, and then it should also, avoid these kind of tax evasions or offshore entering into our, country. All factors have to be considered, and then once a framework is there, once a comprehensive framework is there, then it can be slightly tweaked at a later point of time based on the emerging concerns. But without now going for incremental change at this point of time is not, enough, not at all enough.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ramakrishnan, and thank you so much to all our panelists for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation and take part in this pre-budget dialogue series of Think Change Forum. We'll have many more such, and as mentioned earlier, the deliberations of this roundtable will be put together in a report and submitted to the government for consideration. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.